Okay. So, I'm going to talk about a company called Ryd that I'm doing work for right now. I was brought on to build their React Native app and kind of set up the whole just technology in general. Right now they're running off of text messaging, and we're hoping to open up Ryd to the public with an app. So I've got a, pause that music. So what Ryd does is they have these electric vehicles, and what you do is you text the Ryd number, text them where you want to get picked up and where you want to get taken to, and then the driver will text you back with an ETA, often 10 minutes or less, and you get driven to where you want to go. So it's kind of fun, kind of whimsical. The vehicles, if you see them, they run downtown Vancouver Monday through Friday right now, kind of during regular business hours. And so RIDE stands for Rethink Your Drive. It's connecting people to places. The technical term for it is first and last mile commuter assistance. The way it works is you text, a ride driver picks you up, takes you to your destination, share it with your friends, and then on the ride vehicles, we advertise for local businesses. They can get their decal, logo, and stuff on there. These are the vehicles. Kind of the ones we have right now are, we have 3 of these, which are built by GEM. Again, 100% electric. Top speed is like 25, maybe 30 if you're going downhill. You can't legally drive them on a street that speed limit is above 35. So that kind of limits us to the city streets. Our current ride zone is kind of south of Mill Plain, I-5, and then west to that's Esther Street there, Esther Short Park. Okay, no cursing. Esther Short Park's here. And our plan is to expand. So up Main Street to 4th Plain, it will be our next area to go as we add more vehicles. We have 3 of those GEMs, and then we have a 4th vehicle, which is a GEM, and I think there's only 3 of them in the US right now, but it kind of looks like an old small Volkswagen van, has like vinyl seats and stuff, has the sun-baked vinyl smell, so that one's really fun. And so moving on to the Ryd app. So of course we want to release to iOS and Android. We want to open Ryd up to the public. Right now Ryd we serve different corporate clients. So for example, Discover.org downtown doesn't have enough parking like a lot of businesses, so we have a parking lot, a ride lot that's a mile and a half away. About 40 of their employees park at the ride lot, and then because they do international work, so a lot of their employees get off at like 5 in the morning, go in, so we start at 5 for them, drive them in the morning till about 9 a.m., taking employees to and from the parking lot, and then again for them in the evening. A couple other small businesses downtown, such as Wellhaven, the pet store, pet hospital, and then LSW Architects. That building, there's a couple businesses in there we service as well. So the app is going to open Ryd to the public, where you can, the new revenue stream for us will be small businesses in the area can be a sponsored ride stop. So they pay like a monthly fee, and then riders for free can choose different ride stops to be picked up and dropped off at. And then after we get that working, our plan is to do a monthly subscription to where you can be picked up anywhere inside of the ride zone, not just the ride stops. And then for this app, in our technology choices, we need technologies that will work well with a small dev team, that dev team currently being myself. So the feature set we want, I kind of ran through it, but you need to be able to select a ride stop to be picked up at, select a ride stop to be dropped off at. You need to receive an ETA from the drivers on when they'll be there to pick you up. And then you need another notification when the ride driver arrives so that you can walk outside to the curb. I'll show you some wireframes. Let's see, to mirror my display. Okay, so our free users. Okay, great. You can see that okay. Typical login. And then our goal is with the design. So for me, I really enjoy kind of understanding the holistic approach to the app and the business. I would say understanding why, and then being able to make the appropriate technology choices to get it done within the client's budget, as well as having people adopt the technology correctly. That's the part that really excites me about software development. So this, we have scaled way back for the version 1 release, which we're targeting July 1st to release that to the app stores. Anyways, with this design, people who are used to Uber and Lyft, we want to provide a similar experience because it's kind of a rideshare thing. People often ask, oh, is that Uber or Lyft? And it's like, no, it's a new thing for downtown Vancouver. So we kind of want to fulfill those expectations so the users aren't frustrated. So you select your pickup location, select your drop-off location. After a short time, you select number of passengers. So the vehicles, 1 driver, 5 passengers. And then request ride. And then you get your 2 locations, 2 passengers, and then a 10-minute ETA there. And so that is the free rider experience. And I'll show you the driver experience. Okay, so the driver experience, this is where we go super basic with the tech, and we try to offload as much of the processing onto the drivers themselves. So because we work at a scale with maybe 2 or 3 active drivers, we think we're going to be able to pull this off. And considering they're functioning right now just text messages, so we have a phone number that then gets forwarded to like 3 phones for all the drivers that are currently active. So this would be a driver's queue when a new ride request come in. So a user says, pick me up. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the current ride at the top. So it's sorted by your ETA, and then you have your queues below. So that's the ETA time you said. You can update your ETA. It will trigger a push notification to the user. Different statuses for accepted. So the ETAs down here, all of these have been accepted. Then you mark en route and it pushes it up to the top of your screen. Here we'll do another push notification to the user, and then complete clears it out of your screen. We don't need to push any more notifications there. You can cancel the ride and forfeit the ride. Forfeiting the ride puts the ride back into the queue for the other drivers to accept it, and then canceling just cancels the ride altogether. Yep. Open the map and see where you're going. So this is where you normally would kind of have an algorithm to pick the driver, or a driver selects one and accepts it. So for us, what we're doing is this is where Hashira is what we're using for the backend, and it allows us to do real-time updates and subscriptions. So here a new ride request comes in. All the drivers receive this ride request, and they can give an ETA. So for example, I say I'm 5 minutes away, and then you can see the 10 minutes and 15 minutes are grayed out. That means other drivers have selected those time slots. Once a time slot is selected, other drivers can't select it. And then because we want to remove as much logic as possible, the drivers then have to see, oh, I chose 5 minutes, I'm the lowest time, so I'm going to go ahead and take that ride. And it gets put into your queue. Okay, so that's the app. Adobe XD. Oh. Sorry. Oh, wait. So tech stack, React Native. I've been working in the last 2 years in React and JavaScript, full-time in React Native for the past, I guess, 1.5 years now, because I've been working on Ryd for almost 6 months. I've done and taught a couple workshops on React Native, so that's kind of my strengths right now. And then Hashira was recommended to me by Nate, which was a great choice. Hashira is, let's see, I'm going to talk about React Native first. So, who here is familiar with React Native? Okay, have you guys done programming in it or just familiar? Great. So, those of you who are new to React Native is JavaScript. It's a framework by Facebook. It takes React for web, and what it does is compiles it down to native components. So, the benefit of React Native versus some other options is that it's actual native components, whereas versus like a web view inside of a native app, so it looks and feels like native. The JavaScript part, the JavaScript thread runs the React diffing engine and then tells the native components how to update based on that. The other great thing is you get all your favorite like JavaScript libraries that you're used to programming in. As long as the library doesn't rely on the DOM, because you don't have the DOM, you can use it in a React Native app. You also get like the benefits of ES6 or TypeScript if you want to. Anything that compiles to JavaScript you can use for React Native. At this point, it's proven and well adopted. Let's see, React Native for iOS came out first, and then I think 2 years ago now, React Native for Android's been out, and that's the time I started working in React Native. Of course, Facebook uses it because it's their framework. Instagram uses it. One of the big adopters this last year is the NFL did a complete rebuild of their app in React Native. And then the strong community is, because it is native, sometimes you have to go over the bridge from JavaScript to native. And at this point, a lot of those native things, such as like camera function, gyroscope function, that you normally would have to write native code, people have written wrappers for already. For your major things, it's very unlikely at this point you actually have to write native code. I started working like in the web with React, came over to React Native, and the first week on a project in React Native was able to start making components and putting things on the screen, which is really awesome. And Hashira is a newer company. Hashira is a library that puts GraphQL on top of Postgres. And so GraphQL, how familiar are you guys with GraphQL? So GraphQL is a query language for APIs, where you just describe what you want and then it gives it to you. So GraphQL runs on the client side as well as the server side, and they talk to each other, and you don't have to write custom endpoints. As a client-side developer, I can be like, here's my query of everything I want. I just send it off and it gives me the data back. It's also, Hashira is self-documenting. There's a library that's called GraphQL that's built into Hashira. You can use GraphQL outside of Hashira as well. But it's essentially like a visual playground where you can write out your queries, see what queries are in the database, play around, hit play on the button, and see what data you get back in your query. And it's like, oh yeah, that's what I need. So then you can copy and paste that into your client-side code. So a really fast development cycle because of that. Hashira, the real-time subscriptions. Since it's on Postgres, if you make a table, you can subscribe to that table, and then you get real-time updates over WebSockets for data updates in that table, which is what was one of the reasons, that's one of the things we need for ETAs, ride requests and stuff, so we're using subscriptions for that. And then the other benefit is it has an admin dashboard. And that means as a client-side developer, I don't have to write any back-end code. I can do it all through a GUI, create my tables, create my schema, and then GraphQL is generated for me. It also has the ability for webhooks, so that's what we're going to be using for push notifications. When a ride request is made or a ride request is updated, it triggers the webhook, and then we're using Amazon's push notification service to push those notifications to the app. It also has the ability to add additional data sources. So we have a small node service that takes care of the Stripe payments for our users, and that service is then tied into Hashira through that. The one thing you do need, though, is knowledge of Postgres. Being a client-side developer, we took Ryd to a tech challenge in Portland, and a company called MHP, which is actually a Porsche company, as in the car company, was there. And they're like, hey, we like Ryd, we want to work with you guys. So they're actually architecting our database. So that's very exciting, and I'm really happy about that because their knowledge of Postgres is much deeper than mine. So So Tech Advantage is entirely JavaScript. Everything I'm writing is in JavaScript because I don't have to write backend code. Any logic, kind of like Uber and Lyft kind of give a ride to a driver. Since we don't have any of that logic, we're putting all that logic on the drivers themselves. We don't have any sort of API for that. We could do a node service for that if we wanted to. But very little server-side programming, just connecting with Stripe essentially at this point. Good for a small team because there's not a whole lot you need to be an expert at. And then the database is built on Postgres, so if you architect it correctly, it's as robust as Postgres. So we feel good about scaling. I can demo some code. I'm guessing you guys probably want to see the Hashira dashboard. Has anybody used Hashira before? Okay. Okay, so Hashira has like one-click deployment to Heroku. And what you get then is after you set up your Heroku key on the server, you can see it here, you then just get a login screen where you just type in the password, and then you land here on the dashboard. So here the first thing you see is we're going to do post request to our Heroku app, and then request headers. To make any of these requests work, I need to put in, I'm using auth0 for authentication for the app. So I have a JWT token, and I would need the token to be able to make these requests. But here, this is the GraphQL, and when working with GraphQL, you can see just by the way the tables are architected and like the queries are written, here I have a full list of all the queries of the database, and I didn't have to write any of this. A writer, for example, the different fields you can get from a writer. I can click play there. Oh, no writers. Okay. Should be users. The database is totally empty. Okay. Over here, you have your schema tab of the database, so you can view all of the tables. Let's see. I'm going to try to explain how kind of a ride request comes in. So essentially, we have a ride come in, and then on a ride, we have a status of let's see. So the table a driver is going to subscribe to is going to be the queue table, and a queue table is the table that essentially connects the driver table with the rider table. And so as a ride request comes in, before you give an ETA, you have no status. As soon as you put an ETA, that ride request gets the accepted status. And then after all the drivers put in their ETAs, there's essentially three new ride queue. Three new rows get created in the ride queue table, one for each one of those accepted. And then the driver that clicks take updates the status of theirs to accepted and locked. And then all of the other rows that were created for ride queue are then gone. And at that point, the ride status gets updated to accepted. And then if the queue is accepted, if the ride's accepted, it gets put into the driver's list. And then This is a really hard way to look at the schema.
Need a bigger screen.
Yes.
TV is just small. You had mentioned that when the status changes to accepted and locked, that the other entries, the other records, are gone, get destroyed. Where's that business logic live? Is that like a database trigger or something, or is there some other way to implement logic in Ashura?
It may be the way we filter through the subscriptions as well.
So maybe it's not that the record actually gets destroyed, but rather that it gets filtered out because the status has changed.
Yes.
I see.
And then the ride, gets created and attached to a driver.
I like that you spell Ryd R-Y-D in the tables.
Yes.
I think that's probably a key design decision.
Yes, I was doing that on like the cards for the user stories, calling them riders, R-Y, and I was like, after a day of that, I was like, oh, no. We're not going to do that. Anyways, so the way the ride queue and the ride table connect with the driver and the rider with those two different status fields allows us to subscribe and sort and filter without any additional API logic. And I'm curious to see what kind of database triggers we'll need and how big that ride queue table will get, or the ride table, because as soon as you say completed, we may delete the row, because we're also going to have event logging on the database, and that's where we're going to pull a lot of the analytics from, is the different event logs. Yeah. So this is part of the webhooks part of Ashura. Correct, currently. I don't think we've set up the logging part, and I don't know if we'll use this part of the events. This part will, let's see, when we connect with the push notifications, we'll be using it for that. Push notifications is interesting. You have to use Apple's push notification service for iOS, and then we'll be using Firebase for Android. So it's kind of weird that we have to set up 2 more accounts for push notifications on each device type.
Didn't you also mention using something from AWS for push notifications?
Yeah.
What are you using there?
So that's the part. So we use Apple's push notifications, which then connects to AWS. And then we use Firebase to drive the events to push to AWS. And so that's how you have to do it with React Native. And so then AWS integrates with Apple's system and Firebase, as well as a couple other services.
Is that SNS? Is that what you're using? The simple notification service? Or
Yes.
Something else? Okay.
That's it. Yeah. And we don't have that set up yet, so I just kind of have an overview of like, this is what it should look like.
But once that's set up, SNS will speak. It'll work with iOS and Android.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, after it goes through Apple and Firebase. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions on this?
I saw below your queries there under Explorer, you have some mutations. Do you write your own mutations, or do those get generated for you?
I believe they're generated. And so, let's see.
Oh, those are the mutations there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think. I'm looking for ones that I wouldn't normally need.
What's the mutation? Is that infinite loop? Don't click it.
There it is. Mutation.
Yeah. All right.
I want to say these are all generated because this update, the stop station, is not something we have in the scope. We just would do it manually in the database. You can create a new row.
Yeah, that sort of gives you cred for your mutations if you create a table. Sweet. Just super basic stuff, so you can at least start deleting and creating things.
And then we'll be using Mapbox for the map within the app, which has its own React Native wrapper. So Mapbox is all native code, but I just work with the JavaScript API because of the wrapper, yeah.
Why did you choose Mapbox versus, I don't know, the hundreds of other mapping services?
I've used it in the past, and I like them as a company. Yeah. And then they just recently released some navigation updates to Mapbox in the last year, and they even do like they have API calls for like curbside pickup. So like a driver later on, when if we want to integrate more, we can say curbside pickup, so it'll actually navigate the driver around the block, so they don't have to do U-turn in the middle of the street, which is pretty sweet.
That's pretty sweet.
On the React Native side, so this is Storybook. It's cut off the bottom, but Storybook allows you to just view components in various different states. So here in Storybook, I have a component that is our create account screen. And so here, this is a native input for iOS. Native text views, all native to iOS. Here, this is your native iOS buttons as well. And then if we look at the screen in the code, it's just a React component. So this is all JavaScript. Your normal imports you'd be used to. I have themes with different layout styles, which look very similar to CSS. So for example, margin bottom, instead of using your dashes, you just do the JavaScript styles. You don't need to do pixels because it'll do the DPI correctly for the density of the screens. And this is all in TypeScript. So you can see I have as text style for typing. And then to get into the React class, you set state in the constructor. Component did mount for hiding keyboard stuff. Basically show date picker. When you click on that, hide date picker. And then in rendering, you have, instead of having divs and spans that you'd normally have for web, you have just React Native components from the React Native standard library. So keyboard avoiding view is one of those. This is a view for when the keyboard slides up on the screen, which I have it set to hardware keyboard. Anyways, it allows me to scroll the screen down further. Without that, your stuff would be hidden behind the screen. Yeah. Row is a component I created. It basically just puts margins on the sides. So it's a consistent way for me to get the same margins throughout the entire app. And text input, I added a little bit too. The date input is a component that you just install through npm. So you click on the box and you have a native iOS date picker. And then same thing for Android, you get the native Android date picker. And it's as easy as just installing a library from npm. Some other things you have is specifics for the platform. So technically React Native you can use on any device that has the JavaScript engine. But of course the two main platforms it's used for right now is iOS and Android. There are libraries like React Native for web that lets you program React Native components, and it will also compile them to web. So it's like full circle React. But essentially what you can do is create a component that can render on your website, in your iOS app, and your Android app, all with React Native. Another great thing about React Native is any of your business logic. I don't have much in here, but any of your just plain JavaScript logic, you can put in a node module and host it in a private repo on NPM and pull into all of your projects. So I've done that before on a website and React Native app where it was a lot of forms and stuff. So all that form logic and validation we shared between web and native apps. Okay. You can do internationalization as well, which is really cool. And pretty straightforward to do. Okay. Any questions you guys have?
So you haven't gotten to API communication yet? So just
Correct.
components so far?
Just components so far, yes. This week I'm hoping to connect it to Hashira. There are Vladimir Novik just started working for Hashira, and he's gotten several videos up in the last month or so on connecting using Hashira real-time subscriptions with Vue, Gatsby.js, and he probably has one for React Native as well. But
Hashira doesn't give you anything like you can bring into React Native to make it something. You're gonna like wind up using Apollo or
yes, yeah. So I'm using Apollo on the React Native side, and then I believe Hashira uses Apollo as well on their side.
Apollo server.
Yes.
That's what enables your like subscription stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You said you were using Auth0 for authentication. Have you set authentication up yet in the app, or is that?
I have.
How's that work?
Yeah. There is, you have to do some setup on Heroku with keys. And then in the users table,
Like on your Hashira.
yep, your Hashira deployment of on Heroku. And then you have Auth0 ID. And then Auth0 has a webhook. And so like when you create a new user, it's got like data that I basically mapped to the Hashira users table. So then Auth0 puts the token, the Auth0 ID, into the user row, and then the token I put in the post requests need to match this Auth0 ID and be a valid JWT token. And then I can make database updates.
what is Lambda sauce and why should I use it instead of Lambda?
Yes. So let me see some of the functions I was using.
Is it something Infinite Red wrote or that?
So it's from Steve Kellock, who I worked with at Infinite Red. He's no longer at Infinite Red. Oh, I don't even use .path in here. So if .path is a great one because if you have something that's like 3 or 4 layers deep in a JavaScript object, you do .path and it will not break or blow up if one of those dots isn't there.
Why
Yes.
instead of indexes.
Mhm.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
Cool.
So just some friendly
Yes.
wrappers around.
Yeah, and then there's like a null check that's really helpful, and some other ones.
So it's like Ramda user trip a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
I should create a Ramda library that makes Ramda harder to use.
You just
There's one that makes it easier to use.
No, that's just regular Ramda.
Yeah, you're right.
Also, what is Ramda?
Oh, it's
Functional helper library.
maintained by Infinite Red now.
Ian told me about Ramda,
Yeah.
and I've used it since then.
Yeah, so here's your example of
Perfect.
.path.
Oh man.
Is not null, is null or empty,
Okay, yeah.
or is nil or empty,
yeah,
yeah.
I literally did a nil or empty with Ramda today.
Yeah.
And used 2 functions. So that's great. Very cool.
Yeah, so Rando is kind of like I use it instead of Lodash, for those of you who aren't familiar with Rando. It's very functional based. Yeah. That's all I have for you guys, unless you have some more questions or anything.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's me, Vancouver Full Stack Slack. You guys are welcome to message me, ask me questions on there. And then you can also email me, aj@riffcreativestudio.com.